Hello, welcome back. This is Jeff Byers and this is NE255, and we are now going to go into Maya Classic Particles and creating and understanding how we can manipulate the attributes so we can control them a little bit better. So let's talk about the different types of emitters that we can create, and that'll help us decide which emitter is the best tool for the job that we need to do. So let's go ahead and get things set up. So under the submenu of the main menu, we need to make sure we have FX selected, and that will give us all the fluids, particles, and dynamic solvers that we need on the top menu. Okay, and then I don't usually use the main menu bar, but you can if you want to, and if you hold down the space bar you can go to Hotbox Controls, click on it, and go to Show FX and go to FX Only, and that allows you then to hold down the space bar. I'm holding down the space bar and selecting the particles and fields and constraints. You can see that whole line here is what we'll be going through. We've got a lot to go through, but we're not going to be able to hit every single one of these during the 15 weeks that we have, but we're going to be hitting most of these, so you get a little taste of everything. But right now we're going to focus on end particles. Now, we talked about the differences between Maya Classic and end particles. Well, the end particle tool is here. Okay, we're not going to use that right now. Okay, that takes that takes a heavier system to run because they have self-collide, and that takes a lot of simulation power to recreate a realistic simulation. So we're going to go on, and here's the create emitter for end particles. But what we're looking for is down here at the legacy. That's the same thing as saying that these are Maya Classic particles. So we're going to go down here and we're going to work with these specifically. Okay, so create emitter. So we're going to go through those first. Alright, so in this video we're going to go through the different types and how to control them and what to do, so you guys get a nice foundation, so when you start working with the Module 1 assignment, which is to create a rain effect and a snow effect and an environment for both. So you're going to have to model and texture the environment for both of these. So make sure you give yourself enough time. This is going to take about 6 to 10 hours to finish, depending on your skill level. And most of your time will be doing simplistic modeling and just simplistic texturing to make your scenes look decent, so you can get it. So you can go above and beyond. That's what I consider above and beyond. Alright, so with that, we're going to go and do the first one, which is Omni. Okay. Now Omni, we can add more particles, but I'm not going to. We're just going to keep it at the default at 100. Okay. Cycle emission, we're just going to keep that to time random off. And speed, we're going to keep it at 1, and random and speed random. I usually keep the defaults because you can change them in the attribute editor or the channel editor anytime. Okay. Alright, so let's go ahead and click on create, and you've created your first emitter, and we don't see anything going on there yet. And it runs off of a dynamic simulation. So what it does is that it's basically caching along your line, or you can have it cache if you want to. So it's going to run off of your graphics card. So it's using your graphics card speed and memory, how much RAM you have on your card, and it depends on how fast this will go across. Alright, so if you see something different than mine, it's because your card might be slower than mine. It's going to try its best to keep up. That's why we're only going to emit 100 particles, and that's per second. So let's see how that works. Alright, so let's go into your settings preferences. You can do it up here, where you can go to Windows, Settings Preferences. Okay. Or you can also go down here, it's faster, to this little running man running away from a little gear, it looks like. Click on that, and that takes you in the same spot. Okay, so under settings, we kind of want to get everything set up that way. So we're in centimeters, and that's what we need to be as far as this particle dynamics. And so when we go into time slider, our frame rate is 24 frames per second. Okay, all right, so that's film. And so our playback, this is what I have right now, is 1 to 120. You can type that in if you want to. And then the rest of it is okay, except for playback. You want this to be set at play every frame. That means that the simulation needs to basically render in real time per frame. So that's what takes so much power, okay, that it's got to do that. If you put it to this one, it won't work. It won't simulate correctly. So you have to have playback speed at play every frame. And then max playback speed. Now you're going to control that. If you did free, it would spit out. It'll run as fast as your video card can go. So mine is a very powerful video card, so it'll go really fast. Okay. And I don't want that. I want to see real time. To see real time, I need to pull that back a little bit to 24 frames per second. Okay, so we're gonna force my card to play it back in real time. Okay, and so update viewed to active and loop play range. So you just want to keep it looping and click on save. And that's it. Now you're all set up for dynamic simulation. So I won't be going over that every time we do dynamic simulations. But if you notice that you're simulating faster than what mine is, let me give you an idea what it looks like right now. So I'm going to go ahead and play this simulation. Okay, you can see how fast those are coming out. Okay, all right. So first of all, the particles are hard to see. Now I don't know if you're having a hard time seeing my particles or not, but we can make them a little bit easier to see. Okay, so what we can do is we can change those particles, okay, to like Blobby Surface, so we can see them. It'll be a little bit bigger. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into particle shapes. So we can either go into the attribute editor, which is this, Control A, okay. It'll switch between the channel editor and the attribute editor. Now the channel editor may not show everything that the attribute editor can see, so we are going to change things in the attribute editor for now. So we also want to go to Windows and we want to open the outliner, okay, so we can see what we're working with. So sometimes it's hard to pick the particles and sometimes it's hard to pick the emitter. We got two things going on here. Now notice that it doesn't have the nucleus. Well, that's part of the end particle system. We're under classic Maya classic particles right now. We're going to work with those first to give you a better understanding how to control these before we get into the end particle, which is a lot harder to control. There's a lot more attributes to think about and to process. So we're going to go slow first and then move our way up into the end particles. So the emitter, so if we click on the emitter, you can also click up here to these tabs, and that's fine. So let's go into the emitter and just kind of scroll down. And there's quite a bit here. It's not a lot here. But the main thing you want to think about, I'm not going to worry about transform attributes. I'm going to leave those basically defaulted. Plus the transform offset parent matrix. I'm not going to worry about that right now. What we do want to do is, when we think about the emitter, is what type of emitter are we using? Okay, so we're using the omnium, which can be changed in here. I wouldn't do that. Once you create something, it doesn't mean you can't change it. You may find unexpected issues if you try to change it on the fly here instead of going and creating a new scene, like file new scene, and then starting over again. So I want you to be aware of that. You could find yourself things aren't working properly. It's because you changed it on the fly here, and sometimes that can cause issues. Okay, So we got the emitter type Omni. Okay, and the rate, we can bring that up to 1000, so I'm just going to add a 0 there. And that's going to spit out 1000 particles per second, so per 24 frames. Okay, so basically in the first 24 frames it's going to spit out 1000. So each second that it's going through, it's going to slow your simulation down, because it's going to go from 1000 particles in your scene to 2000 particles in your scene to 3 to 4 to 5, and by the time it hits 120 frames we could have 10,000 particles in your scene. Okay, so let's go ahead and play it. So now you can see the particles are a lot more dense, we've got a lot more coming out, and you can see that at the very end of 120, if I were to stop this, okay, let's go ahead and play. Let's turn the playback speed to 1, just play it once and see where we're at. So it should stop at 120, and it does, and there are all the particles that I have in my scene. You can see that's quite massive. Okay, about 10,000. Now my video card can handle it, and this is where you can kind of test your video card. Okay, so if you see how it's running in real time, and that looks good. Okay, so to test my video card, I'm going to go in here and let's change this emitter to one more. That would be 10,000 particles. So I'm going to add another 0 on here. Now I've got 10,000 particles per second. Okay, so I'm testing my video card here with 120 frames. There we go. You can see just a massive amount right now coming out. Okay, there we go. So now we have a massive amount. Now it's still rendering pretty good. Okay, let's see what the frame rate is. So I'm going to go to display, heads up display. I'm going to go to frame rate. Where's that at? That's at the bottom. Okay, so now you can see what mine is playing at. So it's keeping at just about 24 frames per second. You can see as I'm playing the animation right here at the bottom right hand corner, you can see what my video card is able to handle. So right now it drops a little bit here and there, so at 10,000. Okay, so I'm just testing my video card. There we go. Alright, and that's normal, that's good. But if you're dropping at 10 frames per second, then you know your video card is going to have a hard time with some of these simulations. Okay, so knowing that, basically what that does is it allows you to be able to make adjustments to the amount of particles per second that you will show on your when you turn stuff in. Okay, and that's something I will work with you on, of course. Alright, so now let's check out a couple things here just for fun. Is what would that look like, okay, if I was running it free. Okay, so I'm going to go back into the settings, kind of take you through that. So if I go in here and do free, what that means is that my video card power now has just been released. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And so basically it's going to run as fast as it possibly can. Now with 10,000 particles, what can my video card do? Let's take it out. Alright, wow. So it's running at 194.4 frames per second. Okay, 194 frames. So that I have plenty of room, and you may want to test this too to see how your card is performing. Now that was 277. This is 270, and it's different every time. 256, 181. So the fastest I got was 270, which is very fast. Okay, so I don't want that to run. That you can see that that doesn't give me real time. So I'm going to go back in here. So now I know what I can do, and you should know too what your video card can handle. So I'm going to go back to 24 frames per second times 1 and save that. So now we're going to play in real time. All right. So we're not going to mess with how many particles. I just wanted to show you what you can check. You can check your video card. So let's go back to 100. Now that we kind of know where our video card stands. Okay. Now we're going to go to, so under emitters, that gives you the rate particles per second. So every 24 frames is 1 second, okay? And that's how many particles will come out, so 100. So you notice that it hasn't changed. It won't, because it's simulating each frame. So you have to basically rewind it, okay, and then play it again. And now it will update properly. So you cannot scrub particles. It'll crash on you. So don't do that. Don't scrub. This is what scrubbing is, guys. You click on the time slider and you scrub. That's scrubbing. You don't want to do that with particle simulations. You'll crash. So that's warning. That's a warning to you. So go ahead and go back. And we're going to rewind it and play it again. You can play it all the way through. Alright, so I just have it looping one time. So if I want it to loop all the time, I can click down here where it says loop. Okay, so now it's looping all the time. So now it'll go back and forth and just loop over and over again. Okay, if you find you need more time to simulate, feel free to go down here, stop the simulation, and rewind back. And in here, this is kind of getting in my way now. And in here, you can go in here and change that. So let's say I want 300 frames to simulate. So now I have 300 frames. So I've just typed in 300 here. So now I've got 300 frames I can simulate. So it's going to spit out. I'm going to have a lot more particles in my scene at the end of 300 frames, but I have a little more room now to play around. Okay? Alright, which is fine. Right? If you find out you don't need that many frames, you can go back. Let's just say 150 will work for us. So let's go 150. Let's type in 150 for that one too as well, and that'll set that up to 150 frames. So the emitter. So when we look at the emitter, and you can see the attributes for the emitter are the rate, okay, and then the minimum distance and the max distance, okay. So basically what that means is that we want the particles to come directly out. We don't want them to be offset from the particle emitter. So we're going to keep that at 0 and 0. Now the speed is how fast are those particles coming out of the emitter. Okay. So let's go back to the emitter. And the speed is set to 1. If I set it to 0, okay, what's going to happen? Let's check it out. Basically, they're emitting, but they're staying in one little spot there. So they're impossible to see. They're just like sitting there. So they're not coming out. So we can do a speed of 10, and that'll shoot them out pretty quick. There we go. Alright, cool. Right. Awesome. So that's too fast, but if you want to know where the speed is, and the random speed is really important too. So let's do a speed of 1. So what does speed random mean? Well, right now the particles are coming out at the same velocity. All the particles are coming out at the same time, okay? Which is unnatural looking, okay? It's unnatural. So the randomizing the speed at 1 basically allows us to get more of a random effect, so it doesn't look like it's mechanical. Of course, if you want to have a mechanical effect, that's fine. You can leave that off or set that to 0. But normally you're going to want to set that speed, that random speed, to something like 1 or 2 or 3. Alright, so that's basically it. There's not a whole lot there. If we scroll down a little bit farther, we can get into texture transmission attributes. We're not going to get into that. That's a more of a more advanced attribute, so we're going to leave that alone for now. Now let's look at particle shape. So the emitter gives us two things that kind of stick out. Is the particle rate, okay, and the particle speed, okay, and the random. Okay, so these two attributes are what you're going to be used the most. Now the offset, very rarely will you change that, but if it works for you, that's great. Go ahead and use it. But those two are the big ones, okay, for this node emitter, the emitter 1 node. All right, so let's go to particle shape now. So what we can do, there's a lot more things in here that we can change. Okay, So if we know that we want our particles to live for a certain range. Right now they're living as long as my frame rate is. So if I turn this to 10,000, I would have a lot of particles in my scene because it would just keep simulating until it stops, okay, which is the end of your time frame. Okay, so what if we want these particles to die off right away? Okay, we don't want them to live forever, and that's something that you need to think about. You don't want your particles to live forever. You want to get the visual effect that you want done in a certain amount of time, and then you want to kill off the particles. Otherwise they build up in your scene, and you don't want that to happen, especially if you have issues with your computer that's not very fast. Okay, so this is going to be something that you want to change right away. Now I'm not going to mess with the dynamic weight or the conserve, and I want forces in the world, meaning that if I want my particles to be connected to fields, I want that on. Okay, I'm not going to worry about the count or total event count, but what I really want to look at is the lifespan mode. Okay, right now it's set to live forever, which is not realistic. Okay, so we've got constant, random range, lifespan, PP only, which means per particle. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to basically click on constant. That's the one I like the most. Okay, now you could do random range, okay, which makes it look more realistic. Start with constant first. So how long do you want the particles to live? So it says 1 right now. That means 24 frames. Okay, 1 second. So what is 1 second? Well, it's 24 frames. Okay, 24 frames. So after 24 frames, that means the particles will die. Okay, let's check it out. Let's go ahead and rewind and set it. So now they're basically dying off at 24 frames. Okay, they're still being emitted, so their lifespan after they are emitted is 24 frames. That's what it looks like. Okay. Alright, so lifespan, again, if we change that to 2, that would be 48 frames. So 48 frames before they die off. That means that they'll live a little bit longer, so they'll travel farther. And there you go. So now you got, and of course you can set this up any way you like. You could do 1.1 to be exact if you want to, and it'll set up just the way you want it. Okay, now the most realistic way I found is the random range. Okay, so if my lifespan is 1, let's say just give it a little more time, 2, and then my random range will be between 0.5 and 1. Gives you the best results. I'm just going to go ahead and click on 1. And then what we're going to do is rewind it and play it. So now it looks more realistic. It's not coming out exactly the same all over. Okay, and the lifespan range is different. So it can be, some of these are dying off at 1, and some of these are dying off at 2. Okay, so the lifespan random range is between 1 and 2. So it's kind of dying off between those two. Okay, between 24 frames per second or 24 frames and 48. So that's the random range we have, and that makes it look a lot more realistic. Okay. Alright, so with that said, then we can go down, and we got lots of attributes here. We got time attributes. When do you want the emitter to start? Okay. So current frame is 1, so it's going to start at 1. So what if we want to start offset it to 24? Let's say we don't want it to start until frame 24. Okay, so let's go ahead and start that and see what happens. And boom, it starts. Okay, so that's how you can set that up. So let's go ahead and take that back to 1. Okay, and then collision attributes. Okay, that means that if you don't like the collisions of the particles onto another object, now they won't self-collide because it doesn't have a nucleus, but what's going to happen here is that trace step at 10 is usually really good. The higher you go, the slower your simulation will be, because the higher the resolution the collision will be, that gives you a better result. But you have to be very careful with this. So I just keep it at 10, and we'll talk more about how these particles will react and all that stuff. But we'll keep it at 10. But that's what that is. Soft body attributes is more of a advanced attribute, so we're going to keep away from that. Goal weight's the same thing. We're going to keep that set at 3. Instancing, we have to have certain geometry to be able to instance our particles, but this is an amazing piece here that I think we need to cover, and we will cover. That basically you can do some fun mosquitoes or lots of flies or lots of bees swarming a nest. We're going to get into that in one of our modules. It'll be a lot of fun. Or birds in the sky. So it'll be a lot of fun to play with how to instance particles. Emission, basically you can change the seed, which gives it a different look, but I'm going to keep it, because we are just using one emitter, we're just going to keep it at 1. I don't usually mess with most of these right now. We're not going to. So time attributes, we'll go ahead and close that and close these, and I think we want to get into the render attributes, which is really important. So right now we have a render attribute at a point, and that's what we have right here. Okay. So points, so we can change that. Now we have to be careful with changing from one to the other. Maya gets very confused. Okay. So if you get yourself into a problem, Maya does have a problem when you keep going from one and then you click on current render type, and then you go to the next one and current render type, and then you go to the next one and current render type, and pretty soon it gets really fouled up. So let's just talk about these. Multi-point breaks the points up into how many you want. So it'll take one point and break it up into many different points. Okay, and then multi-streak basically will take the particles and elongate them to make them look like they have motion blur. Okay, so it will also tell you how big you want the front and then how long you want the tail. Numeric gives you just numbers. I've not seen any use for that. And of course we have points. That's what we're using now. Spheres, they're kind of fun. They don't render though. Okay, that's a hardware render. These are all hardware render. Okay, or you can render them in software, but there's limitations. Normally you have to render these in hardware, okay, to be able to see them. We have sprites. Basically what those are instanced cards. This is what they use in old video games, and these cards could have images on them. And then we have streak, which I use all the time. We're going to be using that a lot. So basically multi-streak and streak and multi-point and points is what we'll be using the most here. We'll be using Blobby Surface here and there. Very rarely will we ever use tube, but cloud, those two will be. And they are software renderable. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with multi-point. Okay. You can see that it comes out in bunches. So if I have to click on current render type. Okay. Multi-count. Alright. So what do we want these to render? How many do you want those to come out? So let's do 5. Okay, so you can see how that changes that count. So each one of my 100 points has times 5. So if I have 100 coming out, now there's 500 coming out. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and you can see what that looks like. Okay, all right, cool. Stop that and rewind it. Now, again, because I've already set up that render type, all right. So when I go into multi-streak and click on render type, it didn't cause a problem, but if you see it does, you might have to reset your scene. So you kind of need to know in what you want the render type to be. Now I'm not running into an issue yet, but I might. So you always, when you click on something different, you have to click on current render type. Alright, so let's go ahead and see what that does. Okay. Alright. So notice that it's still stuck on the multi-point, the multi-streak. That basically, how many counts do you have? So I've got it set at 5. Okay. Now if I want to go to streak, okay, that just takes it back to just 1. And notice some of these are grayed out. Click on current render type. So you can see that it still has, these are grayed out now because I went to streak instead of multi-streak. I like streak. Now some of you may like the multi-streak, and that's fine. This one looks the best, I think. I like the way that looks because it's shooting out and the tail is longer as it comes out, but then the tail gets shorter as it goes across. Okay, and that's probably what we're going to use for Sparkler and most of our simulations. But so that's streak, and then we have Blobby Surface. Go ahead and stop that, so we don't want to crash the system. So let's go from streak to Blobby Surface. Click on render type. Again, we only have 2 here, but they're really important. Let's go ahead and play that. Oh, that's way too big. So let's do like 0.1. There we go. And that's even too big. Let's go 0.05. We want to keep that pretty small. And let's go to 0.01. I just want to be a little higher. Sorry about this. Let's go to 0.25. There we go. That's good. So we can see them. There we go. That looks better. Okay. And so when you're doing simulations, you may not want to use points or streaks. You may want to use a blobby surface. And that will give you, you can actually see those much better. And that gives you a better visualization of what I'm doing as well too, and how they're reacting. Okay. So we'll just keep it on blobby surfaces for now. Alright, so with the blobby surface, because it's renderable, you can actually select it. So when I click on this, you can go in here and actually add a material to it. Okay. So right now, let's go into my outliner. Let's open that up. There we go. And you can click on particle. Now it's just as easy as this. You can hold down, right click over it, and go to assign new material. And if you are using Arnold like I am, you could go to the Arnold shader and add an AI standard surface shader to it, and it will render in Arnold. Okay, but we're not going to really render particles in Arnold. We might play with it, but right now let's not worry about that. So I'm going to add just a regular material. So let's go to Maya and click on blend. Okay. And then let's go make that white, and you can make it a little bit transparent if you want to, but let's not do it this time. And the diffuse, of course, turn that all the way up, and we can have the specularity, mess with specularity a little bit, kind of get that a little shinier, and reflectivity can be 0.5. Now that reflects the background, which is black. Let's just turn reflectivity down to something like 0.1 maybe would work. Okay, keep reflectivity low. And then how do you render these out real quick? So if you want to go into render settings, okay, now I have it on Arnold render right now. You want to go to Maya software render. Okay, so under the Commons tab, you probably want to set that up at just like JPEG or something like that. And then Maya software, you're going to want to go, and we can do custom low quality, and that will render really super fast. Okay, so with that said, so what do I have for frame, for the frame size? Right now I have HD. Let's go ahead and we can do a full, because this will render super fast. HD 1080. Okay, that's very large, but that's okay. And low quality should render really fast. Let's go ahead and render that out. And there they are. Okay, let's do 1:1 on there. So that's a little bigger than I want, but that's what they look like. Okay, cool. Okay, so if we, let's go back into my particle shape, And so we have the Blobby Surface, and we've got a material on there. Let's make it something that's a little more fun to look at. So I've got the blend shader on there, so I can click on the blend, and we can change that color to any color we want. Let's change it to red, so they are very easy to see. Red, probably not the best. Let's do a, there we go, something like that. Let's go ahead and render that out real quick. There we go. That looks pretty good. Alright, so I don't want to do anything. I want to do a pastel color. That tends to look the best. Alright? So now you can kind of play with the particles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop now, and we're going to continue with this scene here to show you more attributes and how to add fields and play with fields a little bit. And then we'll be done with the Omni, and then we'll go into the directional. Okay? So basically that's the Omni. And we'll go into how to add a field. And so now the next video will be directional, and we'll get into that video next.